融聚智慧，方能融创价值。融你我，融无限。江苏银行。
本节目由江苏银行冠名播出。奥士德空气净化器应用独特负高压电力技术，免清洗、无耗材、非过滤、高分解、恒净化，常有效，做您身边的清新空气管家。2017年的5月10号到12号期间呢，世界经济论坛东盟峰会在柬埔寨的首都金边举行了。来自东南亚、美国、中国等国家和地区的700多位商界、政界以及民间团体人士参加了这次的峰会。峰会的主题呢是青年技术和增长，确保东盟收获数字和人口红利。重点讨论东盟如何在社会、经济、政治快速转型的这个过程当中，确保平衡、可持续的全面增长。那么在为期2天的议程当中呢，由财新传媒与世界经济论坛官方联合主办的财经辩论会“现金不再为王”吸引了不少嘉宾的关注。辩论会呢是由财新国际的董事总经理李欣主持，邀请到了柬埔寨最大的银行阿格丽达的银行总裁 Inchani、万事达总法律顾问兼首席特许经营官 Tim Murphy， 以及总部位于新加坡、涉足游戏、支付和电子商务的 C 集团的总裁 Nick Nash， 以及PayPal东南亚的总经理 Rahul Sinha， 围绕着东南亚的金融和互联网生态、移动支付发展的潜力等话题展开讨论。
Southeast Asia is on the verge of the digital boom. The numbers are stunning. For the more than 600 million people in this region, more than a third are smartphone users, and more than a quarter have subscription to broadband services. The high penetration rate is growing in double digit. But at the same time, we have very low application of many of the services, the digital services, including, let's say, e-commerce, which accounts for only 3% of the retail sales here, compared to more than 14% in US and China market. And so much of the transactions are still taking place in cash. So why is there the mismatch? How to close the gap? Let's first start hearing from Dr. Inchani, who is now the founder and also the president of the largest bank in Cambodia. So, Dr. Inchani, how do you see the mismatch, and how do we change that here?
So thank you, Mr. Lee Sin. I think the subject is inspired me a lot. So because Cambodia, even we are look into compared with the other country in the region in ASEAN, yes, especially we are like not the mature in terms of financial system. But we are not leave behind. We are fast in such a way in terms of technology. So look into the mismatch. You say that compared to the United States and also India, the mature country, the ASEAN, the penetration only 3%. But there are a lot of key barriers into this. So one is the customer education. And secondly, when we talk about the e-commerce, we look into the regulation in place. So when we talk about e-commerce regulation, we talk about Ministry of Commerce, we talk about the National Bank of Cambodia, and we talk about the Ministry of Interior. When look into there is a draft law already in place, but to my understanding, it's from 2015, so it takes time. So this is first customer education. Second is the e-commerce law and regulation, and the third one is related to the availability of the support network. But this is not a big issue. Like I said, we join in this network later, but we move faster.
And now let's switch to Tim. So Tim, you have more than 17 years experience on payment. So tell me how you see the mismatch here, and how would you address that?
So it's a great question. In some ways, cash still remains king, as we've said. 85% of the transactions in the world today are in cash. We know that cash is difficult for consumers in terms of security, in terms of forcing people to wait in line for transactions. We know it's difficult for societies. It promotes the gray economy, and it's a challenge from government standpoint for tax collection. If we increase any country's percentage of electronic payments by 1% relative to PCE, we know we can help accelerate GDP growth, by somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of a percentage point. So the value to be unleashed is substantial. I think the challenge ahead of us is one that requires a whole variety of solutions. This is a challenge that will be addressed by card payments, by mobile payments. It will be addressed by banks and by fintech providers. It will be addressed by the public and the private sector working together. And in our view, there's three things that are essential. The first is you have to recognize that one of the reasons for the mismatch that you've talked about is because electronic payments, distinct from having access to the internet, is a different kind of transaction. Governments want to know who is conducting payments around the world. That means that identity, formal identity for consumers, is a critical part of enabling the world beyond cash and electronic payments. And systems like that lack in many places. And so formal identity is a key part of the dethroning cash as king. We're seeing really interesting progress in India, Nigeria, and other places on very major efforts to provide more people around the world with a formal identity. The second thing we've got to do is recognize that in order to displace cash, we need every human being on the planet to have access to a secure transaction account. We need that account to be usable in many places, and we need to educate consumers, as Dr. Chani said, about the benefits of electronic payments. All three of those things are required, and they will take work across all elements of the sector to drive progress. Financial institutions have a huge role to play, so do mobile money operators, so do e-commerce giants. And one of the critical things we need to do together is make sure that small merchants, small enterprises around the world can accept electronic payments. So there's quite a bit of work to do.
Very interesting. And now, Nick. So, Nick, your company just changed its name this very week from Garena to SEA Group, to C Group, and you are one of the leading internet companies here. You've one of the most highly valued internet company in this region. How do you and how does C Group see the mismatch here, and how do you address that?
We've been talking about this for a while. We are frustrated in some ways by the tremendous mismatch between digitally connected consumers and digitally disconnected paying consumers. And advertising alone will never support great internet business models here. Today in Southeast Asia, about half of our population, almost 300 million people, don't even have a checking account, let alone a fintech sort of snazzy wallet. We find that there really is an opportunity for local and regional champions to be successful. There are phenomenal global businesses like PayPal and MasterCard that will have a role to play here, but we'd be disappointed if there weren't a few local champions as well. But the missing ingredient to do that is deregulation. And the reason we say that is it is probably impossible in some of our countries here for a local startup, an ASEAN startup, to get an e-money license. Liberalizing that, giving our local companies a chance to compete on a level playing field in this region, I think is crucial for us to have a national and a global leader in this area.
Thank you, thank you. So Rahul, now turn to you. You are responsible expanding PayPal in the Southeast Asia region. So how do you see the shift in this region?
I think we can all agree cash is dirty, cash is dangerous, and cash is expensive. I think it's incumbent upon us, the industry players, both global and local, to try and displace it. It has huge benefits for the society, for the economy, for GDP growth, as Timothy mentioned. My vantage point on this area is a little different from what Nick and Timothy mentioned. They were kind of focused a little bit on the consumer side, getting consumers to adopt financial services. Whereas what we have been doing at PayPal and what I have been and my teams have been involved is enabling the small merchants, the MSMEs, the entrepreneurs, the micro enterprises to go online and start earning a livelihood. And I think we've seen tremendous progress in that area. When we talk about financial inclusion, the general definition is typically about getting people who are unbanked a basic financial instrument so that they can do basic transactions. I think we've taken a slightly different stance to this, which is enabling the the underprivileged, the underserved, and allowing them to connect to the global economy and start doing trade, basic trade. And one of my favorite examples which underpins this is in Philippines, a lady called Janine, one of our customers. She's a freelancer. She does web design services. And she used to be a nurse and used to find it very difficult to make her ends meet. Then she discovered that she's a very good content writer and a blog writer. And somebody told her, why don't you go online? So there are a lot of freelance platforms like Upwork, freelancer.com, Facebook, where she could find clients. And PayPal was there to, to bridge the missing link of payment. So she was able to then start doing content work for a global audience and start earning a livelihood. She was able to quit her job and now employs 4 people and runs a fairly big enterprise and earns 10 times that what she was enterprise. So this is an example of dethroning cash. And that's kind of been a big focus area on enabling the MSMEs. And this.
You mentioned the underbanked and also the underprivileged who didn't have formal access to financial service. So who are really the customers here, and how to compare them to the customers elsewhere? Are they different? So Tim, what's your take on that?
So there's probably more similarities than there are differences to answer your question, but I'd point to maybe 2 things. While so-called transaction factors, things like access to financial services, a basic account, or for a small merchant, an ability to transact online is important. At the end of the day, access to the internet, access to mobile services are really fundamental drivers. So this part of the world, relative to places like the United States or China, there are still gaps, and those need to be addressed. And I think policy focused in those spaces will be helpful to drive the digital economy and ultimately helpful to deliver for all of us a world beyond cash. That's one point. The other, this is a market where consumers want to touch and feel what they've bought before they pay. And we need to make sure that digital payment solutions are designed for that use case. In other words, there has to be local variation and local innovation to make sure that the particular cultural needs are being addressed. And it's why, for example, I think the kind of mobile-based P2P solutions that are based on prepaid, where a good can be delivered digitally and then the payment made once the consumer has inspected it, are quite interesting. It's why we're very interested within our own ecosystem on QR-based payments, because you can print a QR code on a receipt and make a card-based payment in a very low-cost and inexpensive way online.
Thank you. And also, let's move on to talk about the infrastructure that is necessary in this region to move that. And Dr. In China, you mentioned about the regulation, you mentioned about the consumer education as well. What other infrastructure you think is needed here?
Again, as I want to highlight, in our case, the access to internet in Cambodia is very high and very convenient and very competitive in terms of pricing. So that's why providers try to compete among one another so that customer can use it much more convenient, and most of the time it's free. So it support the player in the financial industry like bank, financial institution, and other company to develop the facility to support their customer. But when we start to introduce a mobile app, which is very convenient for the customer to register, and then there is a question from the customer, how come? Because when they travel to the branch and offices, there's a lot of questions. We ask them questions, we ask them to provide proof like ID, many things. But via the app, registration via the mobile app, it's so convenient. And we require ID. Also, the same question asked, but the answer filled by them. They provide the answer, they provide the ID, and the registration done via the mobile application. And then the question from the customer, how come it's so convenient? And then they have doubt. They need to come to the office to prove that now I'm your customer already. So the customer have doubt because of so convenient, so secure. They need to go to the bank to tell that I'm your customer, something like that. But because this is it's traditional, it's also cultural, also, so we need to convince them that this is the way it should be. So again, back to the infrastructure. We talk about e-payment, digital. We talk about dethroning cash as a king, but you raised about security. I see that the customer still think in terms of diversification. I have card, I have a mobile phone, it's like function as a wallet, and then they need cash. So branch and office